What's up and welcome back to a new video here on the channel. Today we are going to have a look at the new Magic the Gathering set, Tarkir Dragonstorm, and the most important cards from this set for Standard Constructed. So let's get started. So we're going to start off by looking at the top 10 cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm for Standard Constructed that will slot into the top decks immediately. So we're not going to have a look at the cards yet that will eventually make a potential archetype emerge and that are powerful enough to do that. That'll be later on. For now, we're going to focus on the best decks in the format and what cards can slot into those. This is not going to be in a particular ranked order. It's just the 10 cards that I think are going to be the most important. So we're going to start off with a bang here, and we're going to have a look at the Sun Pearl Kirin. This is a 2-mana 2/1 creature with flash and flying. When this creature enters, you return up to one other target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. If it's a token, draw a card. Now, this card is going to slot in beautifully into the Esper Southbound decks, which is already a tier 1 deck list. I would argue that the Sun Pearl Kirin is better than the Nurturing Pixie and the Fear of Isolation, because I think there's a lot of value to be had in the flash that the card offers you. If your opponent tries to remove a permanent, you can always flash in the Kirin and pick it back up. Of course, you can also play it at sorcery speed if you want to fire off one of your permanents immediately the same turn. But I also think that if it was a token draw card, part of the deck is also pretty busted. You could pick up, a Storm Chaser Talent Otter token and draw a card off of it if that's what you have to do. And I feel like this card makes it pretty obvious that Play Design had no idea that Southbound was going to pop off the way that it has when they designed this card, because this thing is just incredibly pushed. And I think even if you take away the card draw aspect of the card, it would still be completely playable. But yeah, it's huge, it's very pushed, and it's definitely going to be an auto-include in the Esper Southbound decks, and maybe even the Ortsoff Southbound decks as well. Up next, we are going to have a look at the Stadium Headliner. This is a 1-mana 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Mobilize 1. Just a new mechanic with Tarkir. Whenever this creature attacks, you create a tapped and attacking 1/1 Red Warrior creature token. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. It also has an activated ability. For 2 mana, you can sacrifice this creature, and it deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control the target creature. Now, I think this card will immediately slot into the Goblin deck in Standard, and I think it is especially powerful if you also combine it in a Goblin deck list that plays Agatha's Soul Cauldron thanks to the activated ability. But I also think this card is going to be very good in, the Jeskai or Boros Convoke decks, especially with the Mobilize. And if you have Ward Eater's Calls in play, if you want to spice it up, you can shove an Arabella in there. And the Mobilize mechanic is going to do a lot of work there. And this is just like a perfect 1-drop for these decks that want to work with tokens and want to go wide. Up next, we're going to have a look at Coco at Home, better known as United Battlefront. This is a 4-mana sorcery. You look at the top 7 cards of your library and put up to 2 non-creature, non-land permanent cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, with the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So just like with Coco, this card gets the most value if you play a decent amount of 3-drops so that you can get 6 mana value worth out of this card. And I can see this card slot into a wide variety of standard deck lists already. Think about things like blue-white artifacts with Simulacrum Synthesizer, where you could maybe put 2 synthesizers and play with this card, or a synthesizer and another way to trigger it. But it could also fit into things like, mono-white token control or Boros token control, where you can grab a Caretaker's Talent and maybe a Carrot Cake or something to trigger the talent immediately. You can also see it in the Pixie Shells, where you could just basically grab a Nowhere to Run and a Storm Chaser's Talent or a Hopeless Nightmare. It's not great value, but you do get 2 permanents, and it might be interesting to experiment with that a little bit, maybe over something like Stock Up. All I know is that this is an incredible card, and there are a lot of decks that it already slots into, so it will definitely be interesting to see how the United Battlefront is going to impact Standard. I think there's a lot of potential in this card, and I'm very excited to see what it's going to do. Next up, we have one of the 2 Planeswalkers from the set, which is Elspeth Stormslayer. This is a 5-mana Planeswalker with 5 loyalty and a static effect, which reads, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice as many of those tokens are created instead. Elspeth has the +1 ability, where you create a 1/1 White Soldier creature token, a 0 ability, where you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain flying until your next turn, and a -3, destroy target creature an opponent controls with mana value 3 or greater. I think this has to be one of the better Planeswalkers we've seen in recent times. This card does so much. Not only does it protect itself, it has an incredible static effect. It can be kind of like a win con if you have enough tokens, by putting 1/1 counters on everything and giving it evasion with flying. And of course, you can protect yourself by getting rid of a creature with mana value 3 or greater. I could see this card slot into the white token control decks, like mono white token control or Boros token control. I could even see it in the Selesnya Cage deck, where it would be incredibly powerful if you managed to put this card under the Collector's Cage and get it out as fast as turn 3. I can see it in the blue-white artifact decks, like the synthesizer decks, because of the incredible static effect. All I know is that this Planeswalker is incredibly powerful, and I would be shocked if it isn't going to be one of the more powerful Planeswalkers in the format. And like I said, it already goes into a wide variety of decks, and it's going to do a great job making those existing decks a lot more powerful. Up next, we're going to have a look at Thursa Lightshatter. This is a 3-mana 3/3 legendary creature with haste. When Thursa Lightshatter enters, discard up to 2 cards and draw that many cards. Whenever Thursa Lightshatter attacks, if there are 7 more cards in your graveyard, you exile a card at random from your graveyard. You may play that card this turn. So Thursa Lightshatter is kind of just like a better Kiora the Rising Tide. This card is going to slot perfectly into the Jeskai Oculus deck. It's going to be played into any Monument to Endurance deck list that plays red because of the discard effect. It will work beautifully with the Prop's Memory that gets played often in the Jeskai Oculus decks as well. And like the last line of text is just, you know, it's just very powerful to be able to just exile a card at random and play it this turn. Like, being able to replay your spells is going to be huge. And yeah, it definitely seems like a much better card than Kiora the Rising Tide, and is going to be played for sure in these Oculus and Monument decks. Up next, we have a card that I think is incredibly underrated by people. I don't really see many people talk about this thing, but I think the card is huge. That is Kori Steel Cutter. This is a 2-mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 as trample and haste, and then you have the flurry mechanic. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you create a 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess. You may attach this equipment to it, and it's got an equip cost of 2. So this card, in my opinion, is huge. It seems to be the ultimate token engine, as long as you can meet the flurry requirement, which I think is pretty easily done, especially if you build it or slot it in decks that can do that. I could see this card into Jeskai Convoke decks. I could see it in Boros token control decks. I could see it in aggressive red decks. If there's going to be a flurry deck that gets built, this card is going to slot into there too. It's just basically the ultimate token generator. Yeah, the fact that it automatically equips it to one of those Monk tokens as well, in my opinion, is huge. So I have a lot of faith in a Kori Steel Cutter, and I cannot wait to see what it's going to do in the format. Up next, we have a big demon. This is a Rotkur's Rakshasa, a 2-mana 5/5 with Trample and Decayed. So this creature cannot block, but when it attacks, you sacrifice it at the end of combat. And it's got a Renew ability. So exile this card from your graveyard and put a Decayed counter on each of X target creatures. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, as a demon, I think this card is going to slot in immediately with any Unholy Annex decks, especially with those Unholy Annex decks usually being mid-range kind of decks. And this seems like the ultimate mid-range card, especially with that Renew ability, potentially just being a board wipe. Like, if I manage to put 5 mana into the Renew effect and give 3 of my opponent's creatures Decayed, making it so they can only attack me once and then they'll have to get sacrificed, I think that's just huge. Like, it slots into any, you know, maybe like Golgari decks that play the Unholy Annex, or definitely mono black demons. I think this thing is definitely going to be very annoying to play against. And, you know, the curve of turn 2 Rotkur's Rakshasa and the turn 3 Unholy Annex is, yeah, going to leave an impact on the format for sure. Next, we're going to have a look at a card that has a very broken rules interaction with, you guessed it, the Overlords from Duskmourn. This is Tegum, Master Opportunist, 2-mana legendary creature, human monk, 2/2 with flurry. So whenever you cast your second spell each turn, copy it and then exile the spell you cast with 4 time counters on it. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. So the way that Tegum works is basically with the Overlords, if you copy a spell, it isn't cast. So the impending part that makes it a creature won't work. So Tegum is basically a way for you to get an Overlord in play that is not even going to be like impending. So you're going to immediately get the creature out of it. And this is just going to be something that is going to be abused like crazy. Another way for these Overlords to terrorize Standard. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see if Tegum is just going to be slotted into, you know, the domain decks, or if it's going to have its own deck created around it. But Tegum with the Overlords is going to be absolutely busted, and I am worried. Up next, we have Winter Night Stories. This is a 3-mana sorcery. You draw 3 cards, then you discard 2 cards unless you discard a creature card, and it's got a Harmonize cost for 5 mana. So Harmonize is a new effect. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its Harmonize cost. You may tap a creature you control to reduce that cost by X, where X is its power, then exile the spell. So this is going to be insane in Jeskai Oculus. The Oculus decks care about drawing cards and then discarding cards, not only to fill up the graveyard, like the Delirium for fear of missing out, but also, you know, to shove your Oculus in the graveyard or fill up your graveyard so you can hardcast it. But I think this card gets pushed over the top when you realize that you can tap your Oculus to cast a spell for 1 mana. Like, Oculus is 5 power, so you can get the full discount on it. And I think that is going to go incredibly hard. So another fantastic pickup for Jeskai Oculus. It can also slot into other decks that care about this effect, like Monument decks, or maybe other decks that, you know, care about graveyard, like maybe a Sultai Graveyard deck or the Mere Graveyard deck, anything of the sort. This is a really powerful effect, and Harmonize pushes it over the top. So I think we'll see a lot of Winter Night Stories in Standard. And at last, for my top 10 most important cards from the Standard format right now for Tarkir Dragonstorm, we have Rakshas's Bargain. This is a 2-red mana spell in Sultai colors. It's instant speed, and you look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So the way that these 2-red mana cards work is that at its very cheapest, you can cast them for 3 mana. You have to spend black, green, and blue to do so. But you can also cast them in like different combinations. So you can spend 4 mana on this card. So you could do black, green, then spend 2 colorless on it to cast this card for 4 mana. But the important thing to know with these 2-red cards is that on the stack, they're always going to be 6 mana value. Meaning that if you spend 3 mana on this and you have enough to Beanstalk in play, you can get a Beanstalk trigger out of these 2-red mana cards. I think this one is by far the best, as it's an instant speed spell. It's got really sick card draw on there, like 3 mana. Put 2 cards into your hand at instant speed and get a Beanstalk trigger. I feel like that's definitely going to be abused. Feel like it can already just be played very easily in the domain decks. I even think if you spend 4 mana on this thing and you can still get a Beanstalk trigger, that it's still always going to be worth it. These 2-red mana spells in combination with up the Beanstalk is not going to be cute. It's going to be very powerful. This one I think is the most powerful out of all the 2-red mana spells in my opinion. Up next, we're going to have a look at the top 5 cards that I think have the most potential to give birth to a new deck list. So a deck that we don't really see in Standard yet, but these cards are strong enough to potentially make that happen. First up, we have the Mardu Siegebreaker. This is a 4-mana 4/4 creature, human warrior with Death Touch and Haste. When this creature enters, you exile up to 1 other target creature you control until this creature leaves the battlefield. Whenever this creature attacks, for each opponent, create a tapped token that's a copy of the exiled card attacking that opponent. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice those tokens. So this Mardu Siegebreaker has a pretty busted interaction with the prototype creatures, most importantly the Phyrexian Fleshgorger. The way the prototype creatures work, basically you cast them for their prototype cost, you get Fleshgorger as a 3-mana 3/3, but if those cards get exiled and they return to the battlefield, you will have them for their full cost. So you get the 7-mana 7/5 with Menace and Lifelink, and the Siegebreaker curves out incredibly like that. Now, the greatest thing about this combo as well is that if the Siegebreaker has exiled the Phyrexian Fleshgorger, even if your Siegebreaker gets removed and your Fleshgorger returns to the battlefield, it will be for its full cost and not the prototype cost. So this little combo of cards, I think, has a lot of potential. Maybe you want to build it in like a Mardu Scam deck or more like a Mardu mid-range deck. All I know is that I will find a way to break these 2 cards together because this interaction seems incredibly busted. You can also combine this with a bunch of other like prototype cards or, you know, other things that kind of abuse this effect. But the Mardu Siegebreaker reads very powerful and definitely very spicy. So very excited to brew with this card. Next up, I have the one and only Sarkhan Dragon Ascendant. 2-mana 2/2. Human Druid legendary creature. When Sarkhan enters, you may behold a dragon, and if you do, you create a treasure token. So in order to behold a dragon, you choose a dragon you control or reveal a dragon card from your hand. Whenever a dragon you control enters, put a 1/1 counter on Sarkhan. Until end of turn, Sarkhan becomes a dragon in addition to its other types and gains flying. I think if there's going to be a dragon deck in Standard, Sarkhan Dragon Ascendant is always going to be a 4-off in that. I think Sarkhan does everything you want it to do in a dragon deck list. It helps you ramp up into those powerful dragons by creating that treasure token when you behold a dragon. It also turns into a very powerful like win condition in a way, right? Getting those 1/1 counters. Turning it into a dragon can also be relevant if you end up working with any lords or things like Mox Jasper. So yeah, Sarkhan reads like the perfect dragon card, and yeah, definitely an auto include in any deck that wants to work with the dragons in my opinion. Sarkhan, just shove it in all your dragon decks. It is way too good not to do. Then I have Shiko, Paragon of the Way, 5-mana 4/5 dragon with flying and vigilance. And when Shiko enters, you exile target non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard, copy it, and then you may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. So I can see this card being really busted in, you know, a couple of ways. I've seen people mention Shiko in combination with Caretaker's Talent, where basically if Shiko exiles the Caretaker's Talent and makes a copy of it, then you can use the Caretaker's Talent to make a copy of Caretaker's Talent, which would be incredibly powerful. But also this card in combination with maybe Oculus, right? Like you can exile the Oculus, make a token out of it. It's a way to bring it out of the graveyard. I think Shiko is just going to do a lot of work. Being able to play a 5-mana creature and then copy a mana value 3 or less non-land permanent card from your graveyard, it just seems like it has so much value, and I will definitely spend 5 mana on a card like this any day. A 4 or 5 flyer with vigilance and a free card, like I'll take it, you know? That's just great value to me. So I think Shiko is definitely going to find a way into Standard, even though I'm not exactly sure yet in what type of deck that will happen. Then I have the beloved purple snake, the Fangkeeper's Familiar. 4 mana, 3/3, snake with flash. When this creature enters, you choose one. Either you gain 3 life and you surveil 3, you destroy a target enchantment, or you counter target creature spell. This thing just has so many good effects on it. There's no way this thing isn't like busted one way or another. The problem is that we don't really know exactly what deck this card slots into. Do you want to put it into a Sultai mid-range deck? Do you want to create a Sultai flash deck? Could this be a card that gets played in a self-bounce list, like maybe in combination with Town Ain't Big Enough? I have no clue, but it reads very similar to like Airtie. Airtie saw a lot of play, and this snake just does a little bit more. So yeah, I see a lot of potential in this card, even though I don't know exactly the right deck list for it yet, but I will be doing my very best to find a shell in which this snake can shine, because man, does it have a lot of good effects on there. So last in this list of 5 cards I think have the most potential to give birth to a new deck is Dragonback Assault. This is a 6 mana enchantment. When this enchantment enters, it deals 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, and then you have the landfall ability. Whenever land you control enters, create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. Now maybe there's, this is a little bit of cope, but I think that this enchantment reads very strong. I could see it into like a Temur ramp deck, maybe a ramp deck where you focus on landfall, so you abuse that Nissa package, which plays cards like Aftermath Analyst and Lumra, or maybe you just play it in like a Temur ramp deck where you play things like the World Wagon, or you use Kona to cheat the Dragonback Assault in play. I just think that the landfall trigger is huge. I also like that it has that strong ETB effect, so I'm really hoping that Temur ramp becomes a thing in one way or another, and this card just looks like really sweet, like payoff for putting those lands in play. So now we're going to talk about the top 5 archetypes that I think get boosted the most from Tarkir Dragonstorm. So it doesn't have to be any tier 1 decks necessarily, but it could be like tier 3 decks or rogue deck lists that get pushed into the tier 2 territory because they're basically getting so many new and powerful cards from Tarkir Dragonstorm. So let's get started. So first up, I want to talk about the aggressive token go white decks, specifically in the red colors and the white colors. So think about maybe Boros Goblins or Boros or Jeskai Convoke, because these decks are really benefiting from the Mobilize mechanic. And then I'm thinking about cards like Voice of Victory or the Headliner. The Mobilize is obviously huge because we know when a creature attacks, you get that like 1/1 tokens that get created. I can see this mechanic especially be beautiful with cards like Delny and Arabella. Delny will also make your mobilized creatures unblockable, making it so that they can, pack a punch. You could also get mobilized payoff in the form of War Leader's Call or even like an Arabella. And if you combine that with something like Windcrag Siege, where you can choose Mardu, which is if a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, meaning you get double the mobilized triggers, double the Arabella triggers, and it just doesn't stop. Like, it just seems like it would go so over the top. How could this not be pushed into a tier 2 deck? You then also have cards like Frontline Rush that I think are very pushed. A 2 mana instant. You create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or target creature gets +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Like, imagine putting Frontline Rush on an unblocked creature after you're swinging at your opponent with 7 or 8 creatures, which is just huge. Or imagine putting this on the pump up effect on that double strike speed goblin. Like, it just, yeah, I think there's just so many cards that this archetype you know, these decks picked up that I'd be shocked if they didn't end up being tier 2 one way or another. So looking really good for the token go wide aggressive deck list. So up next, I will talk about another deck that's going to take advantage of Mobilize, which is Sacrifice. And they care about the other effect. So with the Mobilize creatures, once they have done their attacking thing, they're going to get sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step. This is an opportunity for you to get triggers that benefit from creatures dying. Think about Ashlizzlle, think about Vron, think about the Vengeful Blood Witch. And I think a great example of a card like this is Avenger of the Fallen. 3 mana 2/4, mobilize X, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So especially if you slot this card into like the Ortho Sacrifice decks with Snarling Gorehound, and they have a lot of Surveil triggers from things like Zahir Glory's Past, you can basically get this Avenger of the Fallen and have a huge mobilize trigger and then get all your like drain dudes to take like advantage of that. In those decks, you can also play an Efenza, the Unyielding Lineage, which I think is a really good card to be played in Ortsav or Absent sacrifice decks. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, an Efenza endures 2. You could basically sacrifice anything that's kind of like fodder and then also make an additional 2/2 White Spirit creature token while you're at it. I think that is going to be very powerful, or at least I hope, because I'll always be rooting for sacrifice decks. So looking forward to that. So next up, I think that the decks that will take advantage of Flurry are going to be doing a ton. I guess we could put this under like a Jeskai Prowess or something like that, where I think a lot of these Flurry cards are just very strong, and I'd be shocked if it doesn't make a deck emerge in one way or another. Think about cards like the Flamehold Grappler, which is a 3 mana 3/3 with First Strike. When this creature enters, you copy the next spell you cast this turn. When you cast it, you may choose new targets for the copy. Or Sage of the Skies, 3 mana 2/3. When you cast this spell, if you've cast another spell this turn, copy the spell. I think you can definitely take advantage of the Flurry mechanic with plot cards from Thunder Junction that are still in the format. Like, you have pretty cheap plot cards in both red and in white to be able to make the Flurry happen, or you just play a bunch of very cheap, like 1 mana cards. I think the Flaming Effigy could maybe be a way for you to get a lot of like Flurry effects. There's a lot of really good Flurry payoff, and I hope that a Jeskai Flurry deck is going to be potentially tier 2. I think the cards look incredibly strong, so I have high hopes. Up next, we have my beloved Jeskai Oculus deck, and also my beloved Monument deck list. Monument to Endurance has absolutely been a pet card for me during Ether Drift, and it's great to see that the discard payoff is still very much alive in Tarkir, but especially for Jeskai Oculus, it's going to be huge. Cards like Thursa Light Shatter, Winter Knight, Glacial Dragon Hunt, these cards are all incredibly pushed and slot beautifully into the Jeskai Oculus deck list. So yeah, I'm hoping that this is finally good enough to make Jeskai Oculus a tier 1 deck. I think it's been a solid tier 2 deck list for quite some time now, one of my go-to decks to climb the ladder with, and I think Tarkir is going to push it all the way over the top. So personally, I am very excited. And then at last, in my 5 archetypes I think benefit the most from Tarkir, we have token control decks with cards like Elspeth and United Battlefront doing a lot of work, I think. Elspeth especially seems to be a very incredibly powerful card. I think United Battlefront is going to basically be a Coco at home, but it's going to work so well in token control deck lists. Think Mono White token control, Boros token control, Blue White synthesizer deck lists. So tokens definitely getting a huge buff from Tarkir, and hopefully these deck lists are going to be pushed into the higher tier 2 range thanks to these incredible upgrades. And then in the last category here, we're going to be talking about the top 5 cards that I am the most excited for to build a deck list around. Definitely let me know in the comments as well what cards you're the most excited for to build around. This is going to be my top 5 list. So up first, I have the Sib-Sig Ceremony. This is a 3 mana legendary enchantment. Creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Whenever a creature you control enters, if you cast it, destroy that creature, then create a 2/2 Black Zombie Druid creature token. So I can see this card in a couple of ways. First up is with indestructible creatures. So if you make like a Sultai deck list where you play just these powerful indestructible creatures that are a little bit expensive to cast but get discounted because of the Sib-Sig Ceremony, think about things like the Filth, Sapsunen, or maybe even the new Kotis, the Fangkeeper. You can really take advantage of the discount there, and the indestructible make it so that the Sib-Sig Ceremony isn't going to destroy that creature. Or on the other side, I could see this in maybe a really fun to play like Ortsav sacrifice deck list where you don't really care if the creatures end up dying. And then if you combine that with reanimator spells, so think about like Helping Hand, maybe even Raise the Past. That's a way for you to put creatures in play without casting them, so they won't be, damaged by the Sipsig Ceremony effect. I think especially the Sipsig Ceremony in combination with 3 mana cards, I also think it could be really cool with the Enduring Innocence, for instance, where you don't care if it dies because it'll return to the battlefield as an enchantment. But yeah, I see a lot of brewing potential in this card. I like these like deck building challenges, and the Sipsig Ceremony is definitely that. So looking forward to building this card and showing you guys a fantastic deck list here on the YouTube channel. Then I have our beloved reprint in the form of Craterhoof Behemoth. Build Craterhoof decks in a couple of ways. I think you can do the classic thing to build Craterhoof in an elf deck, and maybe you can shove the new Nature's Rhythm in there as well. I could see Craterhoof in like a Smuggler Surprise deck list, which would be in like a Gruul Shell, or maybe even as a spicy, like 2 or 3 off in the Selesnya Cage deck, where you can try and cheat it into play much faster. Get that haste effect, get that ETB effect, take your opponent out of the game a lot quicker than you normally would. Craterhoof is just fantastic, and I am very excited for this card. So next up, I have Ureni, the Song Unending. This is an 8-mana 10/10 Spirit Dragon with fly-in, protection from white and from black. When Ureni enters, it deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponents control, where X is the number of lands you control. I can see Ureni in a couple of decks. In an ideal world, I see Ureni in a really cool like Teamer ramp deck. Maybe I play Ureni with Kona to put it in play faster. It would also get played into the Dragonback Assault pile. Maybe I'll play it in combination with the Teamer Battle Crier. Like, I really hope that Teamer Ramp is going to be a cool deck, and having Ureni at the top end would be awesome. Or maybe Ureni into like a Reanimator Shell, where, if Ureni gets brought back to the battlefield with Zombify on like turn 4 or something, and you still manage to deal 4 damage to a creature with that ETB effect, I still think that's incredibly powerful. I think the protection from white and for black is huge, and it's just a 10/10 flyer. Like, let's be real here. This card is awesome, and very much looking forward to brewing with it. Then I have Hollowmurk Siege, a 2-mana enchantment. As this enchantment enters, you choose Sultai or Abzan. Sultai, whenever a counter is put on a creature you control, you get to draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. And Abzan, whenever you attack, put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature against menace until the end of turn. Now, there's one thing about me, and that is I love a good 1/1 counter deck. I could see this played in Golgari counters, or ideally like Abzan counters. There's also a really sweet card that slots into this, which is the Warden of the Grove, which has really cool synergy. But yeah, I just love 1/1 counters. I think the Hollowmurk Siege reads incredibly powerful, especially in combination with things like Innkeeper's Talent or other like engines that get counters on things. It's just going to be fantastic. Like, this is really going to be one of those pet cards. And I've been having a lot of fun also playing with cards like Marketback Walker and stuff. And I really think that Hollowmurk Siege is going to give my beloved archetype a lot of power. So excited for this one. So if you've been following my content, you know that 2 things are true. I love Sacrifice decks, and I love Agatha Soul Cauldrons decks. So you already know there are about 600 brews in my mind right now that involve CDC, Region of the Mire. 2-mana 1/3. You can sacrifice a creature you control with mana value X other than CDC to return target creature card with mana value X +1 from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So CDC is going to pair super well with things like Snarling Gorehound. A lot of ways if you can fill up your graveyard and also have like creatures that can get sacrificed. CDC just goes hard. Copying the activated ability of CDC with the Soul Cauldron is nice. And for my fellow Insidious Roots enjoyers, I've also seen people mention CDC in combination with Insidious Roots in like a combo where you also take advantage of Tyvar. So I really like CDC. I like these kind of like birthing pod effects anyways. And yeah, it's going to be one of the more fun cards to brew around in Tarkir. And hey, maybe it also makes a really cool commander, right? Like another mono black sacrifice commander to add to the roster. I should probably stop doing that, but I just love them too much. So CDC is going to be a ton of fun. So if you see this, thank you so much for sitting through the video. And I hope you enjoyed my top 10 Tarkir Dragonstorm cards for Standard. Definitely let me know in the comments what your favorite cards are. What are you looking forward to? What cards do you think are the most powerful from Tarkir? And if there's any cards that I missed, definitely let me know in the comments as well. So I will see you again tomorrow with the next video, where we're going to be having a look at the first Tarkir Dragonstorm deck list in play on the streamer event client. So very much looking forward to that. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.